The rain was falling in slow, deliberate sheets against my windshield, each droplet streaking across the glass like a tear that refused to dry. The clock on the dashboard glowed 10:42 p.m., its soft light flickering against my trembling hands. I had never imagined that at 58 years old, after 3 decades of quiet loyalty and ordinary comfort, I would be driving aimlessly through the city with a phone on the passenger seat, tracking my husband's location in real time. Daniel had texted me 2 hours earlier, just 3 short words that used to feel harmless. "Working late, honey?" Those words had carried the weight of routine, of normal life, of every night he had stayed past dinner for the past 6 months. But tonight, something in me refused to believe them. Maybe it was the way he'd avoided my eyes that morning, or the faint scent of a new cologne that lingered on his shirt when he kissed me goodbye. Maybe it was the growing silence between us, that heavy, invisible wall that had replaced laughter and comfort. Whatever it was, it pushed me to open the FindShare GPS app, the one we installed after his minor accident last year. What harm could there be in just checking, I told myself, just to be sure he was safe. The moment the map loaded, I felt my stomach drop. His blue location dot wasn't blinking anywhere near St. Luke's Hospital, where he said he'd been called in for an emergency shift. Instead, it sat perfectly still on a narrow road that curved around Lake Kendale, 40 miles away, a place Daniel had sworn he hated because of the mosquitoes and the bad fishing. For a moment, I convinced myself it must be a glitch. Technology fails all the time, right? But as I refreshed the map, the dot moved. Slowly, steadily, like a heartbeat, turning into the driveway of an address I didn't recognize. That was the moment my breathing changed. The world outside my car blurred as my mind began to race, replaying every late-night excuse, every half-hearted smile, every time he'd come home smelling of rain and guilt. I told myself I was being paranoid, that after 30 years together, I owed him trust. But curiosity is a cruel companion when you're alone with fear. I started the car, my heart pounding in rhythm with the wipers. The road stretched ahead like a question I didn't want answered. The highway was almost empty, the kind of emptiness that amplifies every sound. The hum of the engine, the squeak of the tires, the whisper of my breath catching in my throat. Billboards flashed by, half lit by stormlight, each one a fleeting distraction from the truth that was unfolding in pixels on my phone screen. The blue dot kept moving, slow but deliberate, deeper into the countryside. I followed from a distance, every mile peeling another layer of denial from my heart. Once, when Daniel and I were newly married, we'd taken spontaneous midnight drives like this, windows down, music blaring, his hand reaching for mine across the console. I used to think the world could never darken as long as I had that hand to hold. Now, decades later, the same darkness pressed against the car windows, but his hand was nowhere near. I clutched the steering wheel tighter, feeling both foolish and furious for caring so much. Part of me wanted to turn back, go home, crawl into bed, and pretend the world was still as it had been. But another part, the quieter, braver part that had watched lies accumulate like dust, kept whispering, "Keep driving." As the city lights disappeared behind me, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, a woman I barely recognized. Her eyes were sharp, alert, almost frightened. Her face, once soft from years of comfort, looked drawn and tired. That woman didn't belong to Daniel anymore. She belonged to the truth. My phone buzzed suddenly, and I jumped. A new message. "Don't wait up, might stay overnight if the patient needs monitoring." His timing was uncanny, his tone casual, the perfect lie delivered at the perfect moment. I could almost hear his voice, smooth and practiced, the same one that had promised me forever beneath an arch of roses 30 years ago. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone out the window, but instead I laughed, a brittle, broken sound that filled the silence. "You're good, Daniel, but not good enough." By the time I turned onto the narrow road leading towards the lake, the rain had thinned into a mist that curled around the headlights. Trees loomed on either side, their wet branches glistening like bones. I slowed down as I saw it. A faint glow through the fog, a small cabin with light spilling from the windows reflected perfectly on the rippling water. Daniel's car was there, unmistakable, his silver sedan parked neatly beside a red convertible. I parked a short distance away, killing my headlights, my pulse hammering so loud I could hear it in my ears. For a long minute, I just sat there, frozen. The GPS had done its job. It had led me to the truth. The question now was whether I was brave enough to face it. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, every nerve screaming that once I stepped out, I could never go back to ignorance. I took one long, shaky breath, whispered a silent prayer, and stepped into the night, not yet realizing that the truth waiting behind that cabin window would shatter every piece of the life I thought I knew. The air outside was cold and sharp, filled with the earthy scent of wet pine and the hum of insects awakened by the storm's retreat. Each step I took toward that glowing cabin felt like walking deeper into someone else's dream or nightmare. The gravel crunched under my shoes, loud enough to make my heart skip, as if the sound alone could betray me. From this distance, I could see movement inside, shadows shifting gracefully across the curtain-draped windows. A silhouette crossed the room, slender, feminine, with a slow confidence that made my stomach twist. I inched closer, careful not to step on branches, until I reached the thick trunk of an oak tree that gave me a partial view of the living room through a gap in the drapes. There he was, Daniel, my husband, my partner, my once best friend, sitting casually on a beige couch, his tie loosened, his hair slightly damp, laughing in that deep, familiar tone that used to make me feel safe. But it wasn't me who made him laugh now. A woman sat beside him, pouring wine into 2 glasses, her body angled toward his, her hand brushing his arm like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her face cut the light as she turned, and I froze, not because she was beautiful, but because she was recognizable. It took me a few seconds to process what I was seeing. My breath caught, my knees weakened. The woman was Mara, my younger sister, my flesh and blood, the one who used to sleep in my bed when thunderstorms scared her as a child, the one who cried on my shoulder after her second divorce, the one I'd defended when my parents said she was reckless and selfish. She had sworn she'd never betray me, never repeat her patterns of destruction, yet here she was, sitting in my husband's shirt, barefoot, smiling that same mischievous smile she used to flash when she got away with something forbidden. I wanted to blink it away, to believe my eyes were playing tricks in the dim light, but every detail was undeniable. The scar near her wrist, the soft laugh that always rose at the end of her sentences, the silver necklace I'd gifted her last Christmas. My mind tried to build explanations faster than my heart could reject them. Maybe she's helping him plan something for my birthday. Maybe they're talking about family matters. But no, his hand was on her knee. Intimate, familiar, unapologetic. My throat tightened as if invisible hands were squeezing it. I wanted to scream, but the sound that escaped me was more like a whimper. I pressed my back against the tree, sliding down until I was crouched in the mud, my hands covering my mouth. My body was trembling uncontrollably, my thoughts scattered like broken glass. How long had this been happening? Weeks? Months? Years? How many family dinners had they sat across from me, exchanging hidden glances while I passed the salt and smiled like a fool? I could feel something breaking inside me, not anger yet, not even betrayal, just a numb, hollow disbelief that my world was suddenly unrecognizable. I peeked again through the gap in the curtain. Daniel leaned closer to Mara, whispering something that made her laugh softly. She touched his face, tracing her finger along his jaw the same way I used to when he was tired. He looked younger with her, lighter. I realized then that whatever this was, it wasn't a fling. It was comfort. It was practiced. It was love in the ugliest possible form. For a moment, I thought about bursting through that door, demanding answers, breaking every glass in that house until someone bled honesty. But my feet refused to move. The kind of pain that paralyzes doesn't come from shock. It comes from recognition. I knew this version of Daniel, the charming storyteller, the gentle liar. I had ignored his distance for too long, pretending our love was just going through another quiet phase. I had built my peace on excuses, and now it was collapsing in front of me. The rain began again, softly this time, each drop blending with the tears on my cheeks. Through the window, Mara stood up, walking toward the kitchen. Daniel followed, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his lips brushing her neck. My vision blurred. I turned away, gasping like someone drowning in plain air. I leaned against the car, struggling to steady my breathing, but my chest felt crushed under invisible weight. Then, through the window's reflection, I noticed movement, a small figure walking into the room. A girl, maybe 10 or 11, wearing pajamas printed with yellow stars. She rubbed her eyes sleepily and spoke to Daniel. Even though I couldn't hear through the rain, I saw it clearly when she formed the word Dad. That single word shattered everything that remained standing inside me. The girl's features came into focus when she turned toward the light. Brown curls, soft skin, and Daniel's eyes. His exact eyes. The same shape, the same gentle droop when she smiled. My stomach twisted violently as realization spread like fire through my veins. This wasn't just betrayal, this was an entirely separate life, a secret family hidden behind my back for who knows how long. The girl leaned into Mara's arms, and Daniel kissed her forehead with the tenderness of a father, the same tenderness he used to reserve for our children decades ago. My knees buckled, and I slid to the ground, the cold mud soaking through my pants. I didn't cry loudly. The tears came silently, like rain from a gray sky that had no strength left for thunder. I wanted to run toward the cabin, to drag him out and make him face what he had done, but I couldn't. The truth was too heavy to carry. I sat there, drenched, broken, watching the life my husband had built without me. Every lie he had told, every excuse, every missed dinner suddenly fit into place like cruel puzzle pieces. I stayed there for what felt like hours, watching the cabin lights flicker as if mocking me, until finally, exhaustion pulled me down. I curled up on the driver's seat, too drained to move, too hurt to think. The last thing I saw before my eyes closed was the reflection of the GPS still glowing on my phone. Daniel's location dot, steady and unmoving, proof that the nightmare was real, and that my life, as I had known it, was already over. The pale light of dawn crept across the dashboard, gray and unforgiving. I woke with a stiff neck, my clothes damp from the night's rain, my eyes swollen and raw. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then the ache in my chest returned, sharp and merciless, reminding me that this wasn't a nightmare I could shake off. The phone screen beside me had gone dark, its battery nearly drained, but before it faded, I caught a glimpse of the last thing I'd seen before sleep, Daniel's location now blinking from our home address. My throat tightened. He had gone back, as if nothing had happened, as if the man in that cabin, the man who laughed with my sister and kissed that little girl goodnight, didn't exist at all. I sat there for a long while, staring out at the lake, its surface perfectly calm, reflecting a sky that didn't care about human heartbreak. Then, with mechanical precision, I started the car and drove home. Every turn, every red light, every crack in the road felt heavier than it ever had. The streets of our neighborhood were waking up. Joggers, barking dogs, sprinklers hissing to life, ordinary life unfolding around me, oblivious to the funeral taking place in my heart. When I pulled into our driveway, the garage door was already open. Daniel's silver sedan gleamed in the early morning light, spotless as always. The sight of it made bile rise in my throat. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, trying to calm the storm that raged inside me. Then I saw him, walking out of the house with his briefcase in one hand and a box of pastries in the other, whistling softly like a man who'd had a full night's rest. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. He spotted me in the car and smiled that same easy, familiar smile that had once made me feel safe. "Morning, sweetheart," he called, setting the box on the hood of my car. "You're up early. Couldn't sleep?" His voice was warm, casual, almost tender. It took every ounce of strength not to explode right there. Instead, I forced a weak smile. "Something like that," I said, my voice hoarse from crying. He leaned down to kiss my cheek. His lips were cool, soft, practiced. The scent of cologne, the same one I'd smelled the night before, clung to him. "He stopped by that little bakery you like," he continued, opening the box to reveal a neat row of Boston creams. "I know I've been working too much lately. Thought I'd make it up to you." He said it with such sincerity, such confidence that for a fleeting second I almost believed him. Almost. My stomach twisted as I watched him talk, the familiar gestures, the careful charm, the perfect illusion of a devoted husband. How many times had he rehearsed this act? How many mornings had he come home from her bed and walked into mine as if switching worlds were effortless? "Long night?" I asked quietly, keeping my eyes on the pastries. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "One of the worst cases I've had in years. We lost the patient around 3, but that's part of the job, right?" His tone softened, sorrowful but detached. A lie so smooth it barely needed effort. The lie stung more than the betrayal itself. It wasn't just the deceit, it was how easily it flowed from his mouth, how naturally he inhabited both lives without missing a beat. I stared at him, studying every detail, the faint dark circles beneath his eyes, the small crease near his temple, the calm composure that hid monsters underneath. "You must be exhausted," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor inside. "Why don't you go shower? I'll make us some coffee." He smiled gratefully, pecked my forehead, and walked inside. As soon as the door shut behind him, my face crumpled. I leaned against the car, covering my mouth to muffle the sob that broke free. He was inside our home, our shared space, walking across the same floors where we'd raised our children, pretending nothing had changed, while I stood outside like a ghost, haunting the ruins of her own life. I followed him inside a few minutes later, forcing my body into autopilot. The kitchen smelled of coffee and betrayal. He was humming softly from the shower upstairs, water running over the same hands that had caressed another woman only hours ago. I poured the coffee and stared at my reflection in the glass cabinet door. I didn't recognize her, the woman who had once built her entire identity around being a loyal wife, a patient mother, a steady presence in everyone else's chaos. That woman had died last night by the lake, and what remained was someone colder, quieter, sharper. I realized then that confronting him wouldn't give me peace. He was too good at lies, too skilled at rewriting reality. If I screamed, he'd deny. If I cried, he'd comfort. And if I accused, he'd twist. No, I wouldn't give him that power again. When he came downstairs, freshly dressed, he sat at the table and reached for a pastry. "You okay, love? You look pale." I nodded faintly, just didn't sleep much. He chuckled softly, sipping his coffee. "You worry too much. You always have." His words landed like daggers, the casual dismissal of a man who believed his secret was safe. I smiled back, the corners of my lips trembling. "You're right," I said. "I guess I should learn to relax more." Inside, though, something new was forming, a quiet clarity, a steel edge beneath the grief. I watched him leave for work, watched him wave goodbye, watched him drive away in that same silver car that had carried him to another home just hours ago. When he turned the corner, disappearing from view, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. The house fell silent. I stood in the doorway, staring out at the empty street, then looked down at my phone. The GPS app was still open, the little blue dot already moving again. He was heading in the opposite direction of the hospital. My lips curved to something that wasn't quite a smile. Not yet. For the first time since the nightmare began, I didn't feel powerless. I had seen the truth. I had proof. And I had patience, the kind born not from forgiveness, but from quiet rage. As the morning light filled the kitchen, I whispered to myself, "Let him think he's still winning.
because if there was one thing Daniel didn't know about me after 30 years of marriage, it was this. I could be silent when I wanted to, and silence, when sharpened, could cut deeper than any scream.
The rest of that day unfolded like a cruel play I'd already watched too many times. Every move, every sound, every word in our house felt rehearsed, except this time, I wasn't part of the audience. I was the quiet observer behind the curtain, studying the actor who didn't know the show was ending. Daniel texted me through the afternoon, little check-ins like clockwork. You okay? Grab lunch, don't wait up if I'm late again. It was almost poetic, the way he recycled the same excuses that had once calmed me. Only now, every word from him felt like another piece of evidence in a case I hadn't yet decided how to prosecute. I moved through the house like a ghost, taking mental pictures of everything. His laundry basket with shirts that smelled faintly of perfume, the faint lipstick smudge on his coffee thermos lid, the small blue hair tie I found under the passenger seat of his car when I went out to clean it. It wasn't my sister's. I knew her perfume, her habits. This was someone else. Younger, perhaps, or just another shadow in his web of lies. That discovery didn't break me further, it strangely steadied me. The more I saw, the clearer my purpose became. Pain had turned to precision. I started noting the details, the times he said he was working late, the routes his GPS history showed afterward, the random names saved in his call logs. I wasn't tech-savvy before, but heartbreak does something to the human brain. It rewires you, turns you into a detective when love fails to protect you. I set up a second phone account under his name, synced to our shared cloud. He had always been careless with passwords, trusting that I was too gentle, too naive to look. That was his first mistake. Within hours, I had access to his messages, his photos, his notes. The secret life of a man who smiled over breakfast and lied before bedtime. There were receipts from a lakeside diner, bookings under false names, pictures of sunsets taken from angles I'd never seen. And then one picture that made my heart stop. A child's drawing, a crude crayon sketch of 3 stick figures. A man, a woman, and a little girl. The woman's name scrawled at the bottom wasn't mine. That night, when Daniel returned home, I greeted him with the same soft smile I'd perfected that morning. He looked tired, but content, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Rough day? I asked, handing him a glass of wine. He sighed, leaned in and kissed my cheek. You have no idea. I almost laughed at the irony. I did have an idea. More than he'd ever imagine. But I played along, sitting beside him on the couch, listening to his stories of surgeries that never happened, of coworkers I'd never met. Every lie was a thread in his tapestry of deceit, and I let him weave freely, knowing I'd pull every string loose when the time came. He told me he'd be traveling soon, a medical conference upstate, 3 days away. His voice carried that confident tone again, the one that had always disarmed me. But now I recognized it for what it was, the sound of a man who believed he was untouchable. Later that night, when he fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The darkness pressed down like a weight. I thought of the years I'd spent being faithful, the dinners I'd cooked while he was on call, the nights I'd waited up convincing myself love was supposed to hurt sometimes. I thought of our daughter in college, the example I'd set for her, a woman who forgave too quickly and questioned too softly. Shame and rage tangled inside me until something snapped. I got up quietly, walked to the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. The reflection looked back, the same eyes, but colder, sharper. The reflection didn't cry anymore. It planned. I whispered to it, "You've given him everything. Now take something back." Over the next few days, I began documenting everything, meticulously. Photos of receipts, screenshots of messages, GPS coordinates, even recordings of his phone calls. My once simple routine turned into a carefully orchestrated operation. I woke early, smiled through breakfast, kissed him goodbye, then spent the rest of the day piecing together his puzzle. The picture that emerged was uglier than I'd feared. There wasn't just one affair.
There were two. My sister had been his first betrayal, years ago, during a rough patch in our marriage. But this new woman, the one by the lake, was his present obsession. Younger, single, maybe a nurse or a technician. The pictures suggested a fantasy life he'd built around her, a house he rented for her under a fake business name, a child who might not even be his, and weekends that, work emergencies, conveniently covered. By the end of the week, my fear had burned away, leaving only focus. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do, but I knew what I wouldn't do. I wouldn't confront him too soon, and I wouldn't crumble. That's what he'd expect. He'd want me to fall apart, to scream and cry, so he could play the calm savior again. No. This time, I'd be the calm one. I'd be the silence before the earthquake. So when he mentioned his upcoming conference, I smiled and asked what suit he'd pack. He looked relieved, maybe even proud that I was being supportive. I laughed inside. If only he knew what I was really supporting. The final act of the show he'd been starring in for too long. The night before his trip, I placed a tiny recording device inside his car, right under the dashboard, next to the GPS mount. It was small, invisible, and perfectly legal since the car was registered in my name. I wanted to hear his conversations, the tone of his voice when he wasn't performing for me. I wanted the truth in his own words. As he packed his suitcase, humming softly, I stood at the doorway and watched him. It felt strange, like watching a man already halfway gone. "You sure you don't mind me leaving?" he asked. "Not at all," I said. "You deserve a break." He smiled, kissed me goodnight, and promised to call when he arrived. As the bedroom lights dimmed, I felt a shiver run through me. Not of fear, but of anticipation. When morning came and he drove off, I didn't cry this time. I waited an hour, then opened the tracking app. His car icon moved steadily along the highway. Only it didn't head towards the conference center he'd mentioned. It veered off towards the same small town by the lake. My pulse quickened. This was it. The proof would come, not through emotion, but through cold, hard evidence. I gathered my notepad, my second phone, and a camera I'd borrowed from a friend. My hands didn't shake anymore. They were steady, almost calm. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive, not as a wife betrayed, but as a woman about to reclaim her power.
The morning sun rose like a blade of light, cutting through my curtains, sharp and intrusive. By the time Daniel's car was halfway to Lake Kendall, I was already on the road, a thermos of black coffee beside me, and the recording device's receiver app open on my phone. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had once spent her mornings making his breakfast was now chasing his lies. The hum of the engine and the soft buzz of the road beneath my tires steadied my nerves. Every mile between us was a countdown to something inevitable. My heart should have been breaking again, but strangely, it wasn't. I felt hollow, like I'd already grieved the man he used to be, and now I was just investigating the stranger who had replaced him. The clouds hung low over the horizon, the sky dull and gray, mirroring the heaviness inside me. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal itself, or realizing that I hadn't truly known Daniel for a very long time. By noon, I reached the same stretch of road that curved around the lake. The trees were denser this time, their autumn leaves burning orange and red like fire about to consume the forest. Daniel's car was there, parked neatly beside that same red convertible. I stayed far enough not to be seen, the camera lens steady in my hands. A door opened, and then I saw her. The woman from that night, the one with soft brown hair pulled back into a bun, her blue silk robe replaced by jeans and a cream sweater. She looked ordinary. Not the seductress I had painted in my mind, but someone warm, almost maternal. My breath caught when I saw the little girl running toward Daniel, the same child from the drawing. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, her laughter echoing faintly across the quiet lake. Daniel bent down and lifted her effortlessly as she squealed with joy, the kind of joy he used to reserve for our daughter when she was little. That sound, that laughter, pierced me deeper than any confession could. He looked at peace there, like a man who had finally found home. Only It wasn't our home. It wasn't with me. I zoomed in, my pulse quickening. He wasn't visiting for a fling. There was no guilt in his posture, no hesitation in his movements. He looked comfortable, practiced. That was when I realized this wasn't an affair that had just begun. This was a life, a second life. The woman joined them on the porch, holding a mug of coffee, smiling as Daniel kissed her on the forehead. They looked like a family. Her arm draped naturally over his shoulder, the girl between them. I took photo after photo, each one more damning than the last, but my hands didn't tremble anymore. The truth had settled in too deeply for shock. When Daniel stepped inside the cabin, I adjusted my focus on the woman. Something about her tugged at my memory. The shape of her face, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. It took a few seconds, but then the memory hit me like a brick. I had seen her before. 3 years ago, at Daniel's hospital fundraiser. She'd been a nurse, younger, shy, new to the staff. Her name was Hannah, if I remembered correctly. I recalled Daniel mentioning her once, casually, saying she was bright but needed guidance. My stomach turned. Guidance. He'd guided her right into a secret family. I leaned back in my seat, my mind racing. A second family meant years of deceit, hidden bank accounts, double shifts that weren't shifts at all. I thought of the missed birthdays, the canceled anniversaries, the emergency calls that had pulled him away from dinner. Every absence now had a face, a reason, a home by the lake. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The air inside my car felt heavy, suffocating. Then, through the receiver app, I heard voices, faint, crackling through static. Daniel's. He was talking softly. I turned the volume up, heart thudding. I'll tell her soon, I promise. She deserves the truth. I can't keep this up forever. Hannah's voice replied, calm and tired. You've been saying that for years, Dan. You think she won't find out? He sighed, the sound raw. I don't want to hurt her. She's been through enough. I closed my eyes. The words hurt her, sliced through me. He wasn't protecting me out of love. He was protecting himself out of guilt. Then Hannah said something that made my breath stop. You should tell your daughter, too. She'll have questions. My heart skipped. Your daughter. The phrase echoed like thunder. It wasn't just a slip. It was a revelation. My grip on the steering wheel tightened until my knuckles whitened. The little girl wasn't just Hannah's child. She was his. Daniel had a daughter with her. My husband had built an entire new life, a new family, while pretending to be the loyal husband at home. My vision blurred as tears welled up, but I didn't look away. I needed to see it, to feel it, to burn it into memory so I would never, ever doubt myself again. After a few minutes, Daniel and Hannah loaded the car. They drove away together, laughing, the child waving from the back seat. I followed at a distance, careful not to get too close. They stopped at a grocery store in town. I watched as Daniel pushed the cart, Hannah beside him, the child skipping ahead. To the world, they looked like a picture-perfect family running weekend errands. My camera clicked quietly, documenting it all. Every smile, every casual touch, every piece of my life now belonging to someone else. I didn't feel anger at that moment. What I felt was clarity, the kind that comes after a storm, when the wreckage is visible, undeniable. There was no going back. I wouldn't confront him yet. That would give him control again. No, I would build my case piece by piece, until there was nothing left for him to lie about. When I finally drove home, the sun had already dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in bruised purples and fading gold. I parked in the driveway and sat for a long while, staring at the house that had once felt safe. It looked different now, smaller somehow, emptier. I thought about how many dinners I'd eaten alone in that kitchen while he tucked his second daughter into bed somewhere else. My reflection in the windshield looked older, but stronger. You're not done yet, I whispered to myself. You're just getting started. I didn't know exactly what I would do, but I knew this.
Daniel had built a lie, and I was going to tear it apart from the inside out.
That night, as I sat alone in the dim glow of the kitchen light, I realized that grief had a rhythm. It comes in waves: shock, anger, disbelief, and then, when the tide recedes, something unexpected is left behind: clarity. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't trembling. The pain had transformed into something sharper, colder, more controlled. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor on a blank document. For 30 years, Daniel had told our story. Now, I would rewrite it, in truth. Every lie he'd spoken, every absence, every false promise, I began to catalog them one by one. I typed dates, times, GPS coordinates, even snippets from his recorded calls. My fingers moved with purpose, each keystroke steady and deliberate. By midnight, I had created a file titled Parallel Life Evidence. The name made me smile faintly. It was fitting. Daniel had lived 2 lives, but I was about to merge them into one explosive truth. I spent the next few days studying him with a precision I'd never imagined myself capable of. He was careful now, perhaps sensing something in my eyes, the quiet way I watched him. But he underestimated me, as he always had. I laughed at his jokes, served his dinner, listened to his fabricated stories about patients and hospital meetings. All the while, I was gathering proof. I checked our bank accounts, settled transfers to a secondary account under a shell company I'd never heard of. I traced it, following digital breadcrumbs until I found the rental property's payments, the cabin by the lake. He had been funding it for nearly 6 years, hidden beneath layers of paperwork and excuses. I even found insurance paperwork naming a Hannah Marks as a beneficiary. That detail nearly made me choke. Not me, not our daughter, but her. His secret. His replacement. The next morning, I drove to my lawyer's office. I didn't tell Daniel. I sat across from a woman named Rebecca Wells, calm, sharp-eyed, with the kind of quiet authority that made people tell the truth. When I handed her the folder marked Parallel Life, she didn't say much at first. She just flipped through the photos, the messages, the receipts, the bank records. Then she looked up and said softly, "You've done most of my work for me." I nodded. I don't want to destroy him out of rage. I just want him to face what he's done, without warning. She leaned back, studying me. "You're remarkably composed for someone in your situation." I smiled thinly. That's what scares him most. We discussed everything: the legal options, asset protections, custody rights over shared properties, even potential fraud if he'd used marital funds for another family. When I left her office that day, I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a strategist. That evening, Daniel came home late again. I was sitting by the fireplace, pretending to read, the soft glow flickering across my face. He dropped his briefcase by the door and sighed, loosening his tie. "You're still up?" he asked. I looked up, smiled gently. "Couldn't sleep." "Long day?" He nodded, giving me the same tired half smile he always did. "You could say that." I offered him a drink, his favorite whiskey, neat, and as he took it, I saw the faintest flicker of relief in his eyes. He thought I was calm because I didn't know. He thought the storm had passed. But what he didn't realize was that I'd already moved beyond the storm. I'd become the silence before lightning strikes. Over the next few weeks, I began constructing my revenge not through confrontation, but through preparation. I changed the passwords on all joint accounts, redirected mail, moved small amounts of money into a secure fund under my name. Nothing noticeable enough to raise suspicion, but enough to protect myself. I updated the house deed quietly, consulted with Rebecca again, and filed preliminary paperwork labeled as Spousal Financial Inquiry. It was discreet but powerful.
Once processed, Daniel's entire financial web would be under legal scrutiny. I also began collecting more recordings, subtle and telling. One night, I caught him whispering on the phone, "Don't worry, she has no idea. I'll tell her soon." That single line would become the nail in his coffin. And yet, amid all this planning, there were moments when my heart betrayed me. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m., look at his sleeping face, and remember the man I used to love, the one who danced with me in the kitchen, who held my hand through childbirth, who made promises he once meant. Those memories still hurt, but they also reminded me why I couldn't let him win. He'd stolen too many years of my life with his lies. I owed myself the truth, even if it burned everything down. Then came the final piece. I reached out to someone who had been part of his past lies, my sister. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the quiet tension that had divided us after Daniel's supposed hospital fundraiser scandal. I had never confronted her about the rumors then, but now I wanted the truth. She answered the phone hesitantly. "Clara?" Her voice wavered. I could tell she wasn't expecting forgiveness, and she wasn't going to get it. "I just need to know," I said calmly. "Was there ever something between you and Daniel?" Silence. Then a soft, broken whisper. "It was a mistake. Years ago. It ended before it began." I closed my eyes, breathing through the ache. "I thank you for confirming what I already knew, and for the record, you weren't his first or his last." I hung up before she could reply. My hands shook, not from sadness, but from the rush of liberation. Truth, once faced, loses its power to haunt. That night, I went to bed beside Daniel for what I knew would be one of the last times. He murmured something about tomorrow's early shift and kissed my shoulder before rolling over. I stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the clock ticking like a metronome for my heartbeat. I thought about the girl by the lake, the laughter, the fake life he'd built on stolen time. Tomorrow, I would finish what I'd started. I didn't need revenge in the form of shouting or tears. I would take something far more valuable, his peace, his security, his image. Because when a man builds his entire world on lies, the cruelest punishment isn't destruction, it's exposure. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I turned my head to look at him sleeping beside me, so still, so unaware. "Tomorrow," I whispered, my voice steady, "you'll finally work late, for real, in the ruins of your own life."
The morning sun filtered through the blinds, slicing across Daniel's face as he stirred awake. I'd already been up for hours, dressed in quiet determination. The house was unnaturally calm, as though it sensed what was about to happen. I watched him sit up, yawning, oblivious to the fact that his life, our life, was about to fracture in ways he could never repair. "You're up early," he said, rubbing his eyes. I smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep. You?" He shrugged. "Big day ahead. Conference call, then a late meeting with donors. I'll be home late." The ease with which he lied almost made me laugh. His face didn't even twitch. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and left with his usual routine of deception. But what he didn't know was that every step he took from that point on was being documented. Not by me this time, but by professionals I had hired. After my meeting with Rebecca, I'd contacted a private investigator, a quiet, meticulous man named Leonard Kane, ex-law enforcement, the kind of person who didn't ask unnecessary questions. For weeks, he had followed Daniel, gathering more evidence, photos, timestamps, even drone footage of that lake house. Today, I would use it all. I poured coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The GPS tracker blinked. Daniel was on the move. Same route as always. Work? No. The small icon drifted further north, toward the woods, toward her. My pulse quickened, not from jealousy this time, but from focus. This was it.
the moment I'd waited for. I hit record on my phone and whispered to the camera. October 17th, 9:42 a.m. He said he was at work. Then I closed the laptop, grabbed my coat, and walked out the door. The drive was silent, the kind of silence that hums in your ears. The trees along the rural road were turning gold and red, their leaves trembling in the cool wind. It should have been a beautiful day. It was, in fact. But all I could think about was how beauty can mask betrayal so easily. When I reached the familiar turnoff, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. The cabin was hidden behind tall pines, the same one I'd seen in photos and GPS pings. His car was parked in the gravel driveway, another was beside it, sleek, white, hers. I parked my car down the road, heart pounding, and stepped out. My heels sank slightly into the damp ground as I approached. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. Through the window, I saw them. Daniel, laughing, his arm around her waist. She was younger, maybe late 20s, wearing one of his old shirts, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary years ago. They looked comfortable, practiced, the kind of ease that doesn't come from a fling but from routine. He kissed her forehead as she handed him a mug, and for a fleeting second I almost stepped back, as if I were intruding on something private. But then the anger returned. This wasn't love, it was theft. He had stolen my years, my trust, my identity, and handed it to a stranger like a second-hand gift. I didn't knock. I opened the door slowly, quietly. They didn't hear me at first. The music was playing softly, some old jazz tune Daniel used to dance to with me. The irony was almost poetic. "Daniel," I said finally, my voice calm and sharp. He froze. The mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The woman turned, her eyes wide. For a moment, none of us moved. The only sound was the hiss of the coffee machine and the distant hum of the wind outside. "Clara? How?" I stepped further inside, my heels clicking against the wooden floor. "You said you had a meeting. I suppose this is it?" He looked pale, his mouth opening and closing like a man gasping for air. "It's not what it looks like," he began. But I laughed. "Daniel, you've said that line so many times. I'm surprised it still comes out without choking you." The woman, Hannah, looked between us, panic creeping into her features. "I didn't know about any of this. I thought he was divorced." I looked at her, pity softening my voice. "You were deceived too, but now you know exactly who he is." Daniel turned to me, his voice cracking. "Clara, please, we can fix this. I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I snapped, my control slipping for the first time. "You didn't trip and fall into another life, Daniel. You built it. You constructed it piece by piece and left me to rot in the ruins." I took a step closer, my eyes locking onto his. "And now you get to watch it all fall apart." He reached out, desperation in his voice. "Clara, I still love you." The words hit me like a ghost of the past. I stared at him, the man I once adored, and felt nothing. No warmth, no nostalgia, no pity. Only the hollow satisfaction of finality. "You love what I gave you, my loyalty, my forgiveness, my silence. But all of that ends today." I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket and placed it on the counter. "That's everything. Every receipt, every call, every lie. It's already backed up in 3 places, so don't even think about erasing it." Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "You've destroyed me," he murmured. I turned toward the door, pausing only long enough to reply, "No, Daniel, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped covering the wreckage." Then I walked out. leaving behind the life that had imprisoned me for 30 years. The cold wind hit my face like freedom itself. I didn't look back. Behind me, I could faintly hear the sound of Daniel shouting. Not words, just noise. Raw and panicked. But it didn't matter. His words could no longer touch me. As I reached my car, Leonard called. "Everything's done," he said simply. "The board got the files. He's finished." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, not of sadness, but relief. "Thank you." I started the car and drove away, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. For the first time in years, I wasn't following a GPS. I didn't need to know where I was going. All I knew was that I was finally free.
The following week unfolded like a storm that had been building for decades. Once it broke, there was no stopping it. The first ripple came on Monday morning, the hospital's executive meeting. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. Rebecca called me, her voice low but filled with a kind of grim satisfaction. "You should have seen his face," she whispered. The board confronted him with the reports, the falsified receipts, the donations funneled into that so-called research account. He tried to deny everything, but the evidence was too clean, too precise. They've suspended him indefinitely, pending investigation. I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was done. The man who'd once held entire rooms captive with his charm was now reduced to silence, stripped of his titles, his illusions, and his power. By Wednesday, the story had leaked to the local press. Prominent hospital director under investigation for financial misconduct. His picture was everywhere, the same confident smile I used to fall for, now accompanying headlines that spoke of greed and betrayal. Friends stopped calling. Colleagues who once praised him now whispered in corridors. The world he had carefully built over 40 years was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of truth. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead I felt something quieter. Closure. The kind that seeps into you slowly, like sunlight after a long storm. I stayed away from the city for a while. I rented a small cabin by the coast where the air smelled like salt and the nights were filled with nothing but the rhythmic sound of waves. Every morning, I'd wake up before sunrise, wrap myself in a blanket, and sit on the porch with a cup of tea. For the first time in my adult life, there was no schedule, no calls, no pretending. Just me. Raw, unguarded, uncertain, but free. Sometimes memories of Daniel crept in. The early years when love had felt real, before ambition and deceit hollowed him out. I let the memories come, but I didn't let them own me. They were ghosts passing through, not roots anchoring me anymore. One morning, I received an email. It was from an address I didn't recognize at first, hjameson@lawfirmatlanta.com. My heart skipped a beat before I opened it. "Mrs. Evans, I represent a client named Hannah Jameson. She has requested to meet you in person to discuss a matter of importance." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to delete it and forget she existed, but another part, the part that had learned that understanding brings peace, said yes. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near the marina 2 days later. When I walked in, she was already there, looking small, fragile, a shadow of the confident woman I'd seen through that window weeks ago. Her eyes were red, and her hands trembled as she clutched her cup. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "I didn't think you would." I sat down across from her, studying her face. She couldn't have been older than 30. "You said it was important," I replied. She nodded, swallowing hard. "Daniel's gone," she said finally. "He left 2 days ago. No note, no call, just gone. His car was found near the river, but they haven't found him." The words hung between us like smoke, thick and heavy. For a moment, I didn't speak. Part of me wanted to feel something, grief, shock, anger, but all I felt was a quiet, weary sadness. He always ran from consequences.
I said finally. It's who he was. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. He told me he loved me, that he'd leave you soon, that he just needed time. I sighed. He told me the same story 40 years ago. You just believed it sooner. We sat in silence for a while. Then she reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. He left this at the house, with your name on it. My fingers hesitated before touching it. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. I waited until she left before I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in the same steady script that had once filled our anniversary cards. Clara, if you're reading this, then you've already won. I don't know how to explain what I became. Maybe I stopped being a husband long before I stopped pretending to be one. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve it. But for what it's worth, I never stopped loving you. Not the way you think, but the way a drowning man loves the shore he'll never reach again. Take whatever peace you can from this. I'm sorry. I read it 3 times. Each time the words seemed smaller, weaker, like echoes of a voice that no longer mattered. Then I folded it neatly, walked to the pier, and let the wind take it from my hand. The paper fluttered once, twice, and disappeared into the gray water below. That was my final goodbye. The next few days passed in a haze. News channels speculated about Daniel's disappearance. Some claimed he'd fled the country, others hinted at something darker. I didn't care to know the truth anymore. Sometimes closure doesn't come from answers, but from the decision to stop asking questions. I began writing again, something I hadn't in years. Pages filled with fragments of memory, not of him, but of me. My first job, my mother's laughter, the garden we once grew. All the pieces I'd lost while being someone's shadow. Then one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Rebecca called again. They've closed the investigation, she said. The board seized his accounts. The hospital's safe. You're officially out of it. Her voice softened. What will you do now? I looked out at the sea, the golden light reflecting off the waves. Live, I said simply. Really live.
Six months passed. Seasons changed, and so did I. The woman who once trembled behind a steering wheel in the dead of night had vanished, replaced by someone steadier, stronger. Not invincible, but awake. The cabin by the coast had become my sanctuary. I planted a garden there, rows of lavender and rosemary that perfumed the air with calm. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried music again, soft classical pieces that made the mornings gentle and the nights bearable. I'd started volunteering at a local youth center, helping young women find careers after setbacks. They called me Miss Clara, not Mrs. Evans, and I liked it that way. For the first time, I was no one's wife, no one's shadow, no one's secret, just myself. People in town didn't know my story, and I never told it. They just saw a quiet woman who walked her dog by the shore at sunrise, who smiled at strangers and brought fresh bread to the old man who ran the bookstore. Healing, I'd learned, doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It comes quietly, in small acts of kindness, in nights of deep sleep, in the realization that you no longer check your phone waiting for a text that will never come. Still, sometimes I dream of Daniel. Not the monster he became, but the man he was before everything went wrong. The one who used to bring me wildflowers from roadside stands and laugh at old movies. The dreams always ended the same way. Him standing by the river, turning to say something I could never hear before fading into mist. I told myself it was just my mind trying to stitch closure where none existed. But deep down, I knew there were still missing pieces. His body had never been found. His accounts had been emptied weeks before he vanished. And someone had paid off the mortgage on the lake house in full, in cash. The authorities called it a dead man's panic. I called it unfinished business.
One rainy afternoon, while cleaning the small storage closet in the cabin, I found a cardboard box I didn't recognize. Inside were documents, letters, receipts, and a dusty envelope addressed to Clara, to be delivered if found. My heart pounded. I didn't remember packing this. It must have been slipped into my things during the move. Inside the envelope was a single key with a small tag, Safe Deposit Box 312, Westbrook Bank. My hands trembled. Westbrook was 3 hours inland, a place Daniel and I had visited once on a weekend trip years ago. My first instinct was to ignore it, to leave the ghosts buried. But something inside me whispered that peace demanded truth, even the painful kind. The next morning, I drove to Westbrook. The rain followed me like a shadow, streaking the windshield in silver lines. The bank was small, almost forgotten, the kind of place where everyone still knew each other's names. When I showed my ID and the key, the clerk hesitated. "This box has been inactive for almost a year," she said softly. "But yes, it's still under your name. And another, Daniel Evans." My throat tightened. She led me to a quiet room with a single table and brought the box. I sat there for a long time before opening it. Inside, there were no jewels, no cash, no passports, but a black leather journal and a single flash drive. I opened the journal first. The handwriting was Daniel's, slanted, precise, familiar. The first page began, "If you're reading this, Clara, I suppose my cowardice caught up with me." My breath hitched as I read on. Each page peeled back layers of the man I thought I knew. He confessed everything, not just the affair or the financial crimes, but something darker. He wrote, "It started as a cover-up, a donor project gone wrong, a patient's family that was silenced, a fund that turned into leverage. I thought I could fix it, but the deeper I got, the more dangerous it became. By the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late. They owned me." My hands shook. Who were they? The journal didn't say names, only hints, like private backers, silent investors, medical trials abroad. He claimed his disappearance wasn't an escape, but a trade. "If I vanish, you stay safe. They promised they'd leave you alone if I disappeared quietly." The last page was smeared with water stains, tears maybe. "I know you hate me, but understand, I never stopped protecting you, even when I stopped deserving you." The flash drive held video files, encrypted, but the first one opened easily. It was Daniel, recorded weeks before he vanished. His face was pale, eyes sunken, but his voice steady. He said, "If anything happens to me, this is my confession. I falsified reports, yes, but I wasn't the only one. If these files go public, people far more powerful than me will fall. Clara, if you find this, do one thing. Burn it. Don't try to be a hero. Just live." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Outside, thunder rolled like a warning. I stared at the flash drive in my hand, weighing it like a stone. Part of me wanted to destroy it right there, to honor his last plea, and keep the peace I'd fought so hard for. But another part, the part that had followed the GPS into the night, that had faced the lies head-on, whispered that some truths shouldn't stay buried. I left the bank with the drive still in my pocket, rain soaking through my coat. That night, I sat by the window of my cabin, staring at the flicker of the fireplace. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop, heart pounding. The files were endless, transactions, names, offshore accounts, proof of something vast and insidious. Daniel wasn't lying. He had been part of a network laundering money through medical research donations. The scandal that had destroyed him was just the surface. He hadn't vanished out of guilt. He'd been forced into silence. My chest tightened with a strange mix of grief and fury. He had betrayed me, yes, but he had also tried, in his broken way, to shield me from something even darker. The realization didn't absolve him, but it humanized him. For the first time, I saw Daniel not as the villain of my story, but as another victim of his own corruption and cowardice. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I had made my choice. I printed copies of the files and sent them anonymously to an investigative journalist I trusted, someone who had once written about healthcare corruption years ago. Then I burned the flash drive, just as he asked. Watching the plastic melt felt like watching the last tether of our past dissolve into smoke. When the flames died down, I stepped outside into the morning air. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing, streaks of light breaking through clouds like promises. I whispered to the wind, "Goodbye, Daniel." Not with hatred, not with pity, just finality. I turned toward the sea and smiled faintly. The truth, I realized, doesn't always free the guilty. Sometimes it frees the ones they left behind.